So in this part of our presentation, I'll be talking about the time of transition in a general sense, before looking at the part astrology might have to play in this. I think we can probably all agree that we're going through a major transformation on our planet in these current times. And there's a spiritual dimension to this and a material dimension. So on the spiritual side of things, many spiritual teachers suggest that we're undergoing a collective spiritual awakening. This can be termed the time of transition or the ascension process. Many Native American and Mesoamerican prophecies allude to this time period as a transition from one world age to the next. And in our own Western astrological tradition, as we've been discussing today, we can see this in terms of the transition from the Age of Pisces into the Age of Aquarius. On the material side of things, the many scientific and technological advances of recent centuries have brought us to the brink of a new global civilization, with huge levels of population growth and a communications revolution that's brought the world ever closer together. But there's also been the challenges of the environmental crises that we're facing with climate change, high levels of species loss and other issues. Richard Tarner states in Cosmos and Psyche, "We live in an exceptionally precarious era in the history of the world, when the problems of the Earth community are both deepening and accelerating. In such circumstances, we are naturally inclined to consult every source of information and insight that could possibly increase our self-understanding and the effectiveness of our present strategies." And he goes on to talk about astrology in this regard as a source of information we can use. So astrology can help us at any time of transition, whether that's on a global level or obviously on a personal level, so that it can help us step back and see what's going on with greater awareness and open up possible avenues for action. But there's another reason why at this particular juncture astrology may have an important role to play, and that's because as we transition into the Age of Aquarius, astrology itself can be associated with the sign of Aquarius. As a fixed air sign, Aquarius can be associated with the skies, which has a fixed backdrop on which the planets move. And the skies for astrologers can be like a conceptual framework on which the meaning-making systems of astrology are inscribed. But of course, there are different meaning-making systems that have arisen throughout the world. And as we move into this new global culture, astrology itself will also be going through a kind of globalization process. And I thought it'd be interesting to explore this through the lens of the co-rulers of the sign of Aquarius, the planet Uranus and the planet Saturn. So we could maybe associate the diversity of world astrologers with the planet Uranus, who delights in difference and different perspectives. We can maybe associate Saturn with their historical roots of tradition, the defence of the tradition. And there was recently the IVC conference in India sought to open itself up to astrologers from both West and the Vedic tradition to bring them all together to build bridges. But it became, a particular speech at this conference became very controversial, as many of you will be aware. Glenn Perry made a speech called The Two Zodiac Problem, in which he argued very strongly that of the two zodiacs used, the sidereal zodiac being mainly used by Vedic astrologers and the tropical zodiac by Western astrologers, only one of these could really inherit the tradition, since they originally come from the same root. So it was very much a historical based argument. So leaving aside the controversy it caused, we could maybe see this as symbolic in some way of the Saturnian side of the globalization process. Saturn perhaps wants to standardize systems to decide the rules on which the world can come together, whereas Uranus is perhaps happier to enjoy different perspectives and the complexity and paradox of different perspectives. So perhaps as we move forward into the Aquarian age, these two planets, these two archetypes are going to be grappling with each other and needing to accommodate each other in this Aquarian process of globalization. And it was interesting that this kind of flashpoint occurred around these two zodiacs, because we could perhaps associate the sidereal zodiac with Uranus, being as it's based on the stars and constellations, whereas the tropical zodiac we might associate with Saturn, being as it's based on the seasons and the agrarian cycle. Another thing we could link to Uranus in terms of current astrological practice is the incorporation of new astronomical bodies, which are always being discovered more and more. So Chiron and the Centaurs take us beyond the bounds of Saturn and link us into the transpersonal dimensions. The trans-Neptunian objects, some of these are named for non-Western gods and goddesses, so they're bringing in the myths of different cultures into the Western astrological language. With the asteroid goddesses, these are brought in sometimes as feminine archetypes to rebalance the traditionally more male-dominated pantheon of the major planets. But we also see on the Saturnian side the resurgence of traditional Hellenistic and horary astrology, which is more about keeping the boundaries set by Saturn of the 7 traditional planets, and also keeping the traditions and the rules that have been passed down through time. So more and more there's going to need to be a balancing of this ever-increasing exploration of space, more and more things being discovered with the inherited tradition through time. And the internet is kind of like a major technology or forum through which the global culture is evolving. And astrology has really taken off on the internet in recent years. And it seems that with each new medium that develops through which astrology is disseminated, each adds its own kind of slant to how astrology might be practiced. When we had the popularisation of the press in the 20th century, sun sign columns came to the fore through newspaper columns and magazine columns. But on the internet, it seems that form hasn't taken off so much, and it rather favours a kind of focus on the current moment, the current transit, as they apply to everyone. So a kind of general forecast of the current energies. So this focus on the quality of the moment, the current energies, and the assumption of a collective participation in a process, perhaps a process of evolving through these different energies, seems to be coming to the fore. And Grant Maxwell talks about this in his recent book, The Dynamics of Transformation. He suggests that we're on the cusp of a new relationship with time, and that time itself, our relationship with time will be evolving, with more of a focus on the qualitative and archetypal dimensions of time. So just as we've mastered the 3 dimensions, the spatial awareness, now we'll be experiencing a new freedom with time, the 4th dimension. So he envisages, and he sees astrology as being a really important part of this evolutionary process. He envisages a possible world in which the activities and interactions of billions of people would be set against the background not only of linear clock and calendar time, but also of the multivalent quality of each moment, reflected in the planetary aspects. This era would bring constant awareness to the archetypal impulses informing experience, and thus the immense creativity and ingenuity of humanity would be focused on constructing a comprehensive map of the temporal dimensions contours. So I'll leave it there and open it up for discussion or any thoughts people might have.
Rosemary, it's very interesting. We Anne spoke earlier about Stephen Hawking passing away recently, and the actual quote wasn't referenced, but he was saying that there, even as a scientist, he was saying that there is more than linear time, right and left.
Yeah.
There is a vertical time. I mean, this is not news for astrologers sitting here, but for Stephen Hawking to say something like that, I think that's very encouraging, that this concept of time is being explored.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't get my head around all of the new science side of things, but it seems like maybe that is where some new understanding of astrology might come from, or some kind of foundation for it.
What did you think of the axis mundi travelling through the different cosmic zones? You know, that is something that's been recognised, but you know how Stephen Hawking views it. He offers no scientific explanations. At least it was mentioned. It's starting to be discussed. So you say perhaps that this opening up that you're just thinking about, more people are thinking about it on a mundane level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's inevitable, isn't it, that the different astrologers around the world will impact each other, and you find often people from one culture that has its own form of astrology study another, so say Western people going over to Vedic astrology and vice versa, and so there's obviously going to be a mixture of cultural perspectives coming in and influencing all the different astrologers.
I think the proper use of astrology is really to help people to understand themselves, not worry about events or what might happen to them, etc., but to understand it in a view. This is where we should be going.
Yeah, I think it's essential to have that self-understanding before, in a way, you look at the world events, so that you can bring more consciousness to it. Yeah, I think the idea that we're co-creating reality is a very kind of strong idea in the zeitgeist, and understanding astrology from that perspective and having that participatory relationship with it. Maybe.
When people ask me what I do as an astrologer, I say I help people navigate by the stars. And it just struck me at some point that that's what we used to do. You know, I know Stephen. Sorry. Then travel by the sea. They said, both of them said to me separately, and they're not anything to do with astrology, but both of them said when they found out I was an astrologer, oh, that's very interesting, because you cannot be on the sea for 40 years without knowing that there
And then I got talking to them, and I said, and they said, what are you doing? What are you doing as an astrologer? I said, oh, I help people navigate by the stars. And I mean their interior life, and whatever the interior and exterior are. And they thought that was okay. Then they sold me the cheese.
Melanie?
It occurs to me that in the airiness of the incoming Aquarian energy, certainly the attempt to articulate and to understand what astrology is and what it can and cannot do, this is bound to increase. But what I suspect may happen with that is that the gap between all of that mental activity and the true cognition of the true mystery that we are immersed in when we really do connect with astrology, that gap may widen. And that, I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think I can already see this happening.
Yes.
And so, really, and I think it's the personal view here, the only way that we can come anywhere near to even begin to understand anything about astrology is by practicing. So, in other words, practicing it involves us as whole beings, mind, body, spirit, feelings, emotions, and that compound interest is the practice with science. But without the application of the knowledge, it can swim forever exactly. And I see this happening already now. The raw information about what we do is ever more available. But the true experience of what it is to really connect with astrology remains elusive as it should do, because whether or not one believes in privacy, etc., whether or not one believes in that, there is a self-veiling mechanism in all of the esoteric arts that means they're not. They are both out there for all to see. Information anybody can have is really sort of strong on it. But the true connection with the real energy of it, it depends on one building over time a relationship with astrology. It's like building a friendship. Naturally, you can't buy astrology. It's not for sale. It's not a commodity. It's not a career. So I think it's going to be very interesting as we move further into the airy reaches of the scientific areas, how that spectrum resonates. And this is where I see the immense value of schools like this, who are the custodian of something that can't be just learned by rote or can't be taught in soul. And it's not a commodity or the other things I said. It's something much deeper, which is about immersion.
Yeah, and I think Toby, you mentioned this, that the internet on one sense is bringing us all closer together, but on the other hand it's also, keeping people in their houses or on their phones, and so it's kind of connecting on the mental level, as you say, but on the more embodied sense or the heart connection, it's actually perhaps bringing people further away in some sense as well.